Hello friends, myself Ashutosh Pandey from Raksha Shakti University, Ahmedabad. Today I'll be taking the module on urban guerrilla warfare with you. Guerrilla warfare doctrine has focused on its conduct in a rural environment historically. Most guerrilla movements have formed, operated and been supported outside of the cities. Increasing world urbanization is driving the center of gravity of the resistance, the populace, and their will to resist into urban settings. As populations have gravitated to the cities on every continent, the ability to prosecute a successful guerrilla war has often depended on the ability to conduct combat operations in these environments. Predominantly, the aspects of unconventional warfare that were executed in urban settings were those such as intelligence activities, recruiting, sabotage, or subversion. Guerrilla warfare combat operations were done in urban environments only when absolutely necessary. An urban guerrilla is someone who fights a government using unconventional warfare or domestic terrorism in an urban environment, as per the definition given by Carlos Marighella, Marxist Brazilian writer, politician and guerrilla fighter. The urban guerrilla is a person who fights the military dictatorship with weapons using unconventional methods. A revolutionary and an ardent patriot, he is a fighter for his country's liberation, a friend of the people and of freedom. The area in which the urban guerrilla operates is in the large Brazilian cities. There are also criminals or outlaws who work in the big cities. Many times actions by criminals are taken to be actions by urban guerrillas. The urban guerrilla, however, differs radically from the criminal. The criminal benefits personally from his actions and attacks indiscriminately without distinguishing between the exploiters and the exploited, which is why there are so many ordinary people among his victims. The urban guerrilla follows a political goal and only attacks the government, the big businesses, and the foreign imperialists. Another element, just as harmful to the guerrillas as the criminal and also operating in the urban area, is the counter-revolutionary who creates confusion, robs banks, throws bombs, kidnaps, assassinates, and commits the worst crimes imaginable against urban guerrillas. Revolutionary priests, students, and citizens who oppose tyranny and seek liberty. The urban guerrilla is an implacable enemy of the regime and systematically inflicts damage on the authorities and on the people who dominate the country and exercise power. The primary task of the urban guerrilla is to distract, to wear down, to demoralize the military regime and its repressive forces, and also to attack and destroy the wealth and property of the foreign managers and the upper class. The urban guerrilla is not afraid to dismantle and destroy the present economic, political, and social system, for his aim is to aid the rural guerrillas and to help in the creation of a totally new and revolutionary social and political structure with the armed population in power. What is guerrilla warfare? The theory of the guerrilla warfare is the basis of all of the Mao's military writings. This type of warfare is one form of revolutionary war Revolutionary war, as defined by S.P. Huntington, is the struggle between a non governmental group and a government in which the latter attempts to destroy the former by the sum or all the means at its command, and the non governmental groups attempts by all the means at its command to replace the government in some or all its territory. As guerrilla warfare is the form of warfare, it is generally employed by weak people who assume the tactical offensive in selected forms, time, and places. Compared to regular warfare, it is secondary and conducted only till regular forces are organized for the final assault. Guerrilla warfare is never considered an independent form of warfare. In the 19th century, Marx state, our nation fighting for the liberty ought not to adhere rigidly to the accepted rules of warfare. Mass uprising, revolutionary methods, guerrilla bands everywhere, such are the only means by which our small nation can hope to maintain itself against an adversary superior in numbers and equipment. By their use, a weaker force can overcome its stronger and better organized opponents. In the pro-communist era, Arabs led by T. Lawrence used guerrilla tactics with great effectiveness against the Turks. Lawrence believed that guerrilla warfare could be proved to be an exact science granted certain factors and if pursued along certain lines. This he summed up in 50 words. Granted mobility, security in the form of denying targets to the enemy, time and doctrine, idea to convert every subject to friendliness, victor will rest with the insurgents, for the algebraically factors are in the and decisive, and against them perfection of means and spirit struggle quite in vain. Mao pointed out that guerrilla warfare is different only in degree and form. The difference in degree and form, he said, were interrelated. In guerrilla warfare, offensive action predominated over all other forms of action. That generally took the form of surprise attack, command and control, movement, deception and concealment, supply, dispersion of forces, and operational task and intelligence work. Mao emphasized that guerrilla warfare could not be separated from national policy. On the relationship of guerrilla warfare to the people, he said, without the political goal, guerrilla warfare must fail, as it must if its political objectives do not coincide with the aspiration of the people and their sympathy. Co-option and assistance cannot be gained. The essence of the guerrilla warfare is thus revolutionary in nature. On the other hand, in the war of counter-revolutionary nature, there is no place for guerrilla hostilities because guerrilla warfare basically derives from the masses and is supported by them. It can neither exist nor flourish if it separate itself from their sympathies and cooperation. We must know who is a guerrilla. According to Oxford Dictionary, guerrilla is a member of a small independent group taking part in irregular fighting, typically against larger regular forces. Collins Dictionary defines guerrilla as a guerrilla is someone who fights as part of an unofficial or unofficial army, usually against an official army or police force. According to Mao Zedong, it is a weapon that an inferior army may apply against more powerful army. Guerrilla war is an art of fighting revolutionary war, and it is also a weapon of communalism. This is very much a defensive form of warfare against superior and organized army. According to Karl Marx, guerrilla have a distinct modern ring, and herein they put in a nutshell the most revolutionary theory of warfare. The methods of guerrilla fight are to harass, sabotage, and raid the enemy to put down the superior force deployed, who is urban guerrilla. The urban guerrilla is a person who fights the military dictatorship with weapons using unconventional methods. A revolutionary and an ardent patriot, he is a fighter for his country's liberation, friend of the people and of freedom. The area in which the urban guerrilla operates is in the large cities. There are also criminals or outlaws who work in the big cities. Many times, actions by criminals are taken to be actions by urban guerrillas. The urban guerrilla, however, differs radically from the criminal. The criminal benefits personally from his actions and attacks indiscriminately without distinguishing between the exploiters and the exploited, which is why there are so many ordinary people among his victims. The urban guerrilla follows a political goal and only attacks the government, the big businesses, and the foreign imperialists. Another element just as harmful to the guerrilla as the criminal and also operating in the urban area is the counter-revolutionary, who creates confusion, robs banks, throws bombs, kidnaps, assassinates, and commits the worst crimes imaginable against urban guerrillas. Revolutionary priests, students, and citizens who oppose tyranny and seek liberty. The urban guerrilla is an implacable enemy of the regime and systematically inflicts damage on the authorities and on the people who dominate the country and exercise power. The primary task of the urban guerrilla is to distract, to wear down, to demoralize the military regime and its repressive forces, and also to attack and destroy the wealth and property of the foreign managers and the upper class. The urban guerrilla is not afraid to dismantle and destroy the present economic, political, and social system, for his aim is to aid the rural guerrillas and to help in the creation of a totally new and revolutionary political, social culture with the armed population in power. An urban guerrilla is someone who fights a government using unconventional warfare or domestic terrorism in an urban environment. The urban guerrilla phenomenon is essentially one of industrialized society, resting both on the presence of the large urban agglomerations where hideouts are easy to find and on a theory of alienation proper to the modern society of mass consumption. Michael Collins, a commander of the Irish Republican Army, is often considered to be the father of modern urban guerrilla warfare. In April 1919, an elite assassination unit known as the Squad of 12, a post was created. In Dublin, the unit was tasked with hunting down and executing British intelligence operatives. In the city, they can be considered one of the first true urban guerrilla units. Historically, guerrilla warfare was a rural phenomenon. It was not until the 1960s that the limitations of the form were clearly demonstrated. The technique was almost entirely ineffective when used outside of the later colonial environment, as was shown by the Cuban-sponsored efforts in Latin America during the 1960s, culminating in the FOCO campaign headed by Che Guevara in Bolivia that culminated in his death. The need for the target government to be simultaneously incompetent, iniquitous, and politically isolated was rarely met. The failure of rural insurgency forced the discontented to find new avenues for action. Essentially, random terrorism aimed at creating maximum publicity, provoking the targeted regimes into excessive repression and so inciting the general population to join a wider revolutionary struggle. This movement found its mentor in the leader of the ephemeral Acao Libertadora Nacional, Carlos Marighella. Before his death in 1969, he wrote the mini manual of the urban guerrilla, which between the polemics gave clear advice on strategy and was quickly adopted by others around the world. What are the strategies and tactics of guerrilla warfare? Mao underscored surprise and deception as the vital feature of guerrilla tactics. He said that war demanded deception. It was often possible to adopt all kind of measure of deception so that the enemy may be compelled to commit errors and thereby end up being deprived of the superiority and initiative. Mao, in the military principles of Chinese Red Army, summed up his view on the conduct of actual fighting as follows. Attack. Disperse and isolate the enemy forces first. Take extensive rural areas and the small and medium cities first and take the big cities later. Wiping out the enemy's strength is the main goal rather than seizure and holding of territory. Concentrate a superior force in every battle and strive to wipe out the enemy forces thoroughly. Fight no battle unprepared. Fight no battle if not sure of victory. Permit the enemy no breathing space. Fight successive battle without pause. Replenish one's own strength with army and manpower of the enemy. In the mobile warfare, resolutely seized all weakly fortified points and cities at appropriate moments, seize all moderately defended points, and when conditions are ripe, seize strongly defended points. We must understand first the characteristics of urban guerrilla warfare. These are: the urban guerrilla is characterized by his bravery and his decisive nature. He must be a good tactician and a good marksman. The urban guerrilla must be a person of great cleverness to compensate for the fact that he is not sufficiently strong in weapons, ammunition, and equipment. The urban guerrilla must possess initiative, mobility, and flexibility, as well as versatility and a command of any situation. Initiative especially is an indispensable quality. It is not always possible to foresee everything, and the urban guerrilla cannot let himself become confused or wait for instructions. His duty is to act, to find adequate solutions for each problem he faces, and to retreat. It is better to err acting than to do nothing for fear of making without initiative. There is the urban guerrilla warfare. Other important qualities in the urban guerrilla are the following: to be a good walker, to be able to stand up against fatigue, hunger, rain or heat, to know how to hide and how to be vigilant, to conquer the art of dissembling, never to fear danger, to behave the same by day as by night, not to act impetuously, to have unlimited patience, to remain calm and cool in the worst of the conditions and situations, never to leave a track or trail, not to get discouraged. The urban guerrilla must know how to live among the people, and he must be careful not to appear strange and different from ordinary city life. He should not wear clothes that are different from those that other people wear. The urban guerrilla must have a great ability for observation. He must be well informed about everything, particularly about the enemy's movements, and he must be very inquisitive and knowledgeable about the area in which he lives, operates, or travels through. No one can become an urban guerrilla without paying special attention to technical preparation. The technical preparation of the urban guerrilla runs from a concern for his physical condition to a knowledge of an apprenticeship in professions and skills of all kinds, particularly manual skills. A knowledge of various types of ammunition and explosives is another aspect to consider. Among the explosives, dynamite must be well understood. The use of incendiary bombs, smoke bombs, and other types is also indispensable. Prior training to know how to improvise and repair weapons, prepare Molotov cocktails, grenades, mines, homemade destructive devices, how to blow up bridges, tear up and put out of service railroads and railroad cars. These are necessities in the technical preparation of the urban guerrilla that can never be considered unimportant. The urban guerrilla's weapons are light arms, easily obtained, usually captured from the enemy, purchased or made on the spot. Light weapons have the advantage of fast handling and easy transport. In general, light weapons are characterized as being short-barreled. This includes many automatic weapons. Automatic and semi-automatic weapons considerably increase the firepower of the urban guerrilla. The disadvantage of this type of weapon for us is the difficulty in controlling it, resulting in wasted rounds or a wasteful use of ammunition, corrected for only by a good aim and precision firing. Conventional logistics can be expressed with the formula FEFA, F for food, fuel, equipment, ammunition. Conventional logistics refer to the maintenance problems for an army or a regular armed force transported in vehicles with fixed bases and supply lines. Urban guerrillas, on the contrary, are not an army but small armed groups, intentionally fragmented. They have neither vehicles nor rear areas, their supply lines are precarious and insufficient, and they have no fixed bases except in the rudimentary sense of a weapons factory within a house. While the goal of conventional logistics is to supply the war needs of the guerrillas who are used to repress rural and urban rebellion, urban guerrilla logistics aim at sustaining operations and tactics which have nothing in common with conventional warfare and are directed against the government and foreign domination of the country. Money, weapons, ammunition, and explosives and automobiles as well must be expropriated. The urban guerrilla must rob banks and armories and seize explosives and ammunition wherever he finds them. Once he has weapons, ammunition, and explosives, one of the most serious logistics problems facing the urban guerrilla is a hiding place in which to leave the material and appropriate means of transporting it and assembling it where it is needed. This has to be accomplished even when the enemy is alerted and has the roads blocked. The tactics of the urban guerrilla have the following characteristics. It is an aggressive tactic, or in other words, it has an offensive character. As is well known, defensive action means death for us. Since we are inferior to the enemy in firepower and have neither his resources nor his power base, we cannot defend ourselves against or an offensive or a concentrated attack by the guerrillas. That is the reason why our urban technique can never be permanent, can never defend a fixed base or nor remain in any one spot waiting to repel the circle of repression. It is tactic of attack and rapid withdrawal by which we preserve our forces. It is a tactic that aims at the development of urban guerrilla warfare, whose function will be to wear out, demoralize, and distract the enemy forces, permitting the emergence and survival of rural guerrilla warfare, which is destined to play the decisive role in the Revolutionary War. The urban guerrilla must take the enemy's surprise because enemy has no way to combat surprise and becomes confused and destroyed. The best ally of guerrilla is the terrain, and he must use the know-how of terrain with intelligence. Its unevenness. It is its high and low points, its turns, its irregularities, its fixed and secret passages, its abundant areas, its thickets, etc. Taking maximum advantage of all of this for the success of the armed actions, escapes, retreats, covers, and hiding places, impasses and narrow spots, gorges, streets under repair police checkpoints, military zones, and closed off streets, the entrances and exits to tunnels and those that the enemy can close off, corners controlled or watched by the police, traffic light and signals, all this must be thoroughly known and studied in order to avoid fatal errors. The ideal guerrilla is one who operates in his own city and thoroughly knows its streets, its neighborhoods, its transit problems, and its other peculiarities. The guerrilla outsider who comes to a city whose streets are unfamiliar to him as a weak spot, and if he is assigned certain operations, he can endanger them. To avoid grave mistakes, it is necessary for him to get to know the layout of the streets. It is not enough for the urban guerrilla to have in his favor surprise, speed, knowledge of the terrain, and information. He must also demonstrate his command of any situation and a capacity for decisiveness, without which all other advantages will prove to be useless. It is impossible to carry out any action, however well planned, if the urban guerrilla turns out to be indecisive, uncertain, and irresolute. To summarize the urban guerrilla is a person who fights the military dictatorship with weapons using unconventional methods. The urban guerrilla must utilize the limited resource which he possesses. He must have a good knowledge of terrain, act with mobility, speed and surprise, must be decisive in nature. He must be able to identify the popular causes to win public support where government actions become inept and corrupt. The urban guerrilla should not hesitate to step in and show that he opposes the government and thus gains the sympathy of the people. The role of the urban guerrilla in order to win the support of the population is to continue fighting, keeping in mind the interests of the people and heightening the disastrous situation within which the government must act. These are the conditions harmful to the dictatorship which permit the guerrillas to open rural warfare in the middle of an uncontrollable urban rebellion. Thank you so much.